Now, a former UK ambassador to the EU who helped to draft Article 50 has accused the Prime Minister of misleading the public over whether Brexit can be reversed. Lord Kerr said that claims that the process is irrevocable are untrue.
While we're in. While the divorce talks proceed, the parties are still married. Reconciliation is still possible. The article requires the parties to negotiate the arrangements for our withdrawal, but we are not required to withdraw just because Mrs May sent her letter. We can change our minds at any stage during the process. The fact is that it's a political decision that has been made in this country to maintain that there can be no going back. Actually, as far as Brussels is concerned, as far as the treaty is concerned, this country still has a free choice about whether to proceed. As new facts emerge, people are entitled to take a different view, and there's nothing in Article 50 to stop them. I think the British people have the right to know this. They shouldn't be misled.
Well, it comes as the government is set to enshrine in law the exact time it plans to leave the EU, 11 p.m. on the 29th of March 2019, if you're wondering, and you can see just how long our membership of the European Union will last on your screen right now. So can the UK still withdraw from Brexit? More importantly, should we even be thinking about it? And do all the various deadlines, help or hinder the Brexit negotiation process? To talk about all of that is Lucy Thomas, former Deputy Director of Britain Stronger in Europe, now Head of Brexit Advice at Edelman PR, and Labour donor John Mills, Chairman of JML and of Labour Leave. Thank you both very much for joining us. Lucy, if I can start with you, lots to talk about, but let's start first with Lord Kerr saying Brexit is reversible. Is it, and should we do it even if it is?
Well, I think what he's saying is that in theory, the Article 50 process is reversible. And so it's sort of a legal, technical point that it is in theory possible. I think the question of should we is another one entirely. And for me, despite being on the Remain side, it was a democratic decision. People voted in a majority to leave the EU. So I think absolutely we have to respect that and should push for the best possible deal. I think also what Lord Kerr was saying is that were people to change their minds, that he would suggest that you overturn that Article 50 and you think again. But I mean, if you look at the opinion polls, people's opinion hasn't changed. So I think it's wrong to say it should be overturned.
John Mills, do you agree? It's simply unpalatable, isn't it, to be able to reverse Article 50 without at least another referendum?
Well, I think that's right. I think what Lucy said sums up the situation very well. I think also there's a big question about if we were to reverse direction, what sort of response we would get from the European Union. I mean, I think it's very likely that if we did go back, they would insist on us joining the euro. They would insist on us being part of the whole process of building a sort of United States of Europe to cope with the problems around the eurozone. We would be back to all the problems that the Leave side was concerned about who controls our laws, immigration, all these other issues. And so I think if we did have another referendum, you'd probably have the same result, or we did decide in some way to change tack, I think we'd probably finish up with the same result as we had before. And I agree with Lucy, what we really need to do now is just make sure we get the best deal we can and press on.
Yes, Lucy, is that right? You know, even if negotiations go really, really badly, we're not simply just going to be able to walk back into the EU like nothing's happened.
I think I disagree slightly with John there, because I think several EU leaders have said that were the UK to want to go back, we'd be welcome. So I think that is up for debate, really. And
Surely not without punishment, though, Lucy.
I'm not sure, actually. I think we are one of the biggest net contributors. I think there are lots of EU member states who feel very saddened that we've decided to leave. So actually, I think they would be more flexible on us going back in were we to want to. But of course, I'm not saying that we should.
OK, lots of people will be watching this saying, stop talking about it because it's completely irrelevant because we are leaving. So let's move on to these negotiations then, John. 2 weeks given by Michel Barnier to get the money sorted. Is it going to be done in that time?
Well, I think this is a very, very difficult issue. I mean, I do think it's reasonable to pay some contribution towards the European Union because we have got commitments going up to at least 2020. But to talk about paying on top of that anything 30, 40, 50, even 100 billion has been suggested at one stage, is an enormously heavy burden to put on the United Kingdom. Bear in mind, we already have a very large balance of payments deficit with the European Union, a huge income deficit, and we're paying in the contribution every year towards their budget, totaling up to something in excess of £100 billion. To have to pay another huge sum on top of that, I think is really getting to a point, a breaking point. And I'm not at all sure how this is going to resolve itself, especially in as short a time as 2 weeks, and especially before we still don't know what sort of trade deals in the offing.
Yeah, Lucy, what do you think about that? You know, the British government are right, aren't they? We can't really talk about putting money on the table until we know what things are going to look like on the other side.
Yeah, I think as far as the finances are concerned, it is all about leverage for both sides. So from the EU's perspective, they have the ability to decide when sufficient progress has been made on phase one. So they can say, you have to meet our demands over the bill before we'll allow you to move on to future trade talks. But absolutely, whatever those future trade arrangements look like, there will be some idea of finances around that. So I think for both sides, they want to be able to say, if you're the EU, they want the finances sorted now. For the UK, we want our leverage to continue throughout the process. So I think it will be very hard. My guess is that because the UK needs the EU to say sufficient progress has been made in the December summit, I think the UK is the side that is going to have to make some concessions, but let's see.
But John, does having this ticking clock now of 2 weeks help the British government or not?
Well, I don't think it does really. I don't think it's getting closer and closer to the precipice. I mean, it does seem to me that what is really needed now is some more flexibility from the Brussels side. I think that to expect the UK to come up with a huge sum of money without any certainty at all about what these trade negotiations are going to produce is completely unreasonable. And you know, if they insist on getting the UK government to come up with a figure without knowing what the trade arrangement is going to be in 2 weeks, I think there's a real danger that we'll finish up with a standoff. And I don't think that's what most people want.
So, John, quickly, if we get to a fortnight's time and nothing's been sorted, what should we do?
Well, I think at some stage the British government has got to say that enough's enough and we go off on World Trade Organization terms. I don't think this is the best outcome, but there must be a price which the European Union is asking us to pay, which is just too high.
Lucy,
I think we're getting close to that point.
Lucy, what do you think?
I think the highest price of all is walking away with no deal and all of the tariffs and all of the real difficulties for business that would entail. As an example, our cars would go up by 10%. There would be tariffs of around 10% on cars. It would make a lot of businesses here simply not viable, and so we would see huge economic damage. So no deal is really, really a terrible option. So we should not choose that.
John, in terms of where we are at this point, today is the halfway point between the referendum and us leaving. What's been done?
Well, I think a lot of time has been wasted because of the order in which everything has been considered. I mean, it does seem to me that to have tried to isolate the trade deal from discussions over what we're going to pay and citizenship and the Irish border is really getting things in the wrong order and has set these talks up to get to much more of a cliff edge than anybody really would have wanted. I have to say, just in response to Lucy, however, that I do think that if we did have to fall back on WTO terms, they would be nothing like as difficult as a lot of people have said. Just as we were told before the referendum the economy would collapse if we voted for leave. It didn't happen. I don't think there would be the same sort of problems if we did fall back on WTO terms.
Lucy?
Well, they are the set tariff, so unless we can agree some kind of reduced rate, that is simply what they are, so it's a matter of fact.
And in terms of where we are now, Lucy, at the halfway point, we supposedly have to have everything wrapped up by October. John was talking about nothing much has been done up until now. Are we going to get past the halfway point and suddenly everything is going to speed through?
I think ultimately it is a hugely complicated endeavour, and I think both in terms of the UK figuring out what it wants in terms of trade arrangements and all kinds of other arrangements, but also the EU agreeing to that and the negotiations completing, October is a very, very short time window. So I think what has been agreed is that lots of difficult discussions have been had within the UK. I think if you look at what the government has set out, it has been clear that we will leave the single market, we will leave the customs union, we will end free movement, there won't be large budget payments. So I think a lot of decisions have been taken, but in terms of hammering out all of the really finer details, that will take an awfully long time.
Just lastly, John, first, on the customs union, the Irish government have come out in the last couple of days and said they essentially are demanding that Northern Ireland stays in the customs union.
Well, I think that's a very unreasonable and unhelpful demand to make. I mean, there obviously is a problem around the Irish border, but I don't think it's an insoluble one with modern technology, with pre-clearance, with the AO system in place to ensure that they've got trusted traders who don't put false declarations in. I mean, I think that with goodwill, that problem is soluble. And I think that is actually the view of the negotiators in Brussels as well. I mean, there are lots of problems around Brexit, but I don't think that's one that's a deal breaker by any manner of means.
Lucy, do you think the same? Not a deal breaker, the border?
I think it's one of the most difficult situations regarding Brexit. I think you either have a situation where Northern Ireland leaves the single market and customs union, and therefore you have to have some kind of border between Northern Ireland and Ireland, or, as this leaked EU paper suggests, that Northern Ireland remains in the single market and customs union, and you therefore have a border between Northern Ireland and the rest of Britain. Either way round, it's a nightmare scenario. So I think what the EU has said consistently, and indeed what figures in Ireland have said, is that the UK as a whole should remain in the single market and customs union, because then you don't have to have that border. But it is very hard to see what kind of customs arrangements you can have which don't require a border.
OK, Lucy Thomas, John Mills, we'll have to leave it there, but thank you so much for your time.